And to discuss the revelations from the Four Corners program, I was joined a few minutes ago by the opposition immigration spokesman, Scott Morrison. Scott Morrison, thank you very much for coming in.
Thanks, Emma.
So we now know that people smugglers are operating quite successful businesses here in Australia. Whose fault is that?
Well, this has all been happening under the government's watch. I mean, we've had an end-to-end failure, apparently, from this program which we've seen tonight. I mean, end-to-end. I mean, we've got failures all the way through the border protection process, and we've known that for many years. And now we've got smugglers operating within our midst on our own shores, and the government apparently completely oblivious to it. I mean, it's a shocking report. Frankly, it's not very surprising because anything's believable under this government's failed policies in this area, but it is one that should be really gaining the attention, I would have thought, finally, of people within this government to take some serious action.
Did anything like this happen when your side was in government?
Well, in the last 6 years under the Howard government, less than 300 people turned up on a boat. And that's the key issue here. I mean,
were people smuggling operations, were they operating to the same extent within Australia while you were in government?
Well, obviously not, because 300 people turned up over 6 years.
But do you know as a fact that that wasn't the result of criminal gangs working in Australia to bring those people here?
The reason only 300 people turned up in the last 6 years is because we introduced a successful suite of policies which stopped the boats and smashed the people smugglers' business model. Now, this government reversed those policies, opened up the people smugglers' business model. 18,500 people have turned up as a result, and smugglers have come in like needles in a haystack as part of that crowd and are operating within Australia. And it's just quite shocking, frankly, that an ABC Four Corners crew have been able to uncover, as was said tonight, what the government with its resources should have been able to track down. And I mean, people in Australia know clearly and have knowledge of what's happening up in Indonesia. Family members know. Others who come on boats know. They are witnesses to crimes that are taking place with these boats coming to Australia. But it seems it all shuts down and it's very difficult to apparently get the information, and that's just not acceptable.
But my question was, were any people smugglers operating in Australia when you were in government?
Well, I don't think the question is relevant to what we're facing now, because
no, but I'm
the people
interested to know,
smugglers trade was smashed.
How far back does this go? Were they operating when you were in government?
Well, what was not operating were people smugglers running their business to Australia, because only 300 people turned up in 6 years, Emma. I mean, the people smugglers trade was smashed under the Howard government's policies. It was rebirthed under Kevin Rudd and under Julia Gillard. And when those dominoes start falling, as they have now been for many years under this government, then this is where it ends. This is the mess and the chaos where it ends. And the consequences of that we saw sadly on the program tonight. But the other consequence, which is rarely talked about, is in the last 3 years, 8,000 people who would have otherwise got a permanent protection visa in Australia who are waiting offshore will not get one and have not got one because their claims will not be able to be pursued because the places will simply not be available under our program under the special humanitarian visas that are issued. I mean, these are the costs.
How would you categorise the intelligence failings that are evidenced by this program tonight?
Oh, I think they're catastrophic. I think they really are. I mean, we have smugglers coming in and operating within our midst. And, I mean, it raises questions about resourcing, it raises questions about intelligence, but I suppose the broader issue here is that it seems the government's attitude is to just get people through the system. I mean, we have a situation at the moment where now, even despite a primary rejection rate for those coming on boats is now almost half, on appeal, everyone gets through anyway. There seems to be an attitude of the government, oh, let's just get them in and get them out and get them through the system as quickly as we can. Well, in that sort of a laissez-faire environment, then people smugglers will only thrive. And they are thriving. They're thriving in our midst.
So what should be done in reaction to this program and the revelations that it brought?
What should have always have been done? The government just simply has to do its job when it comes to protecting our borders.
But in the immediate term, we know there are 3 criminals at least operating in our midst, bringing people in from all over the world, and there are tentacles in every state virtually, it would seem. What needs to be done right now?
Well, first of all, I would hope all of that information would have been passed over to the Federal Police and they can act on it immediately. And I would hope that that would be the first thing that will be happening even as we speak. But secondly, I think we have to get a lot more serious about the intelligence networks and information that is happening within communities in Australia right now. I mean, there is clearly a knowledge of vessels being organised and people being put together to be put on vessels. People know that here in Australia. Now, we've known that for many, many years. With the tragic case that we've seen at Christmas Island, we know that people were speaking to people before they got on those vessels, and we've heard of other stories where exactly the same thing has happened. People know when people are getting on boats, and we need to be able to ensure we're getting the information out of these communities and the cooperation out of these communities to smash these networks and not take the soft touch approach, which just allows this information just to drift off into the ether.
What about ASIO in all of this? I mean, we talked about the intelligence failings. Should there be some kind of inquiry into the process? I mean, this is quite apart from the government perspective here. Are you concerned about an organisation such as ASIO allowing people smugglers to come into Australia disguised as refugees?
Well, of course I am. But I think the primary area we've got a problem with at the moment seems to be the policing issues on the ground here. And I think that's where the first response is. But if there are implications for other agencies, then I would expect ministers to be following that through and following it through extremely firmly. But when you've got an overall laissez-faire attitude by this government to people coming on boats and they don't seem to think it's really a problem that would require them actually picking up the phones to the Greens and insisting on support for their legislation or adopting the Coalition's proven measures, and they just sit there every time a boat turns off offering up a lame excuse, well, you know, that's the message this government sends to its own agencies and it sends to people smugglers.
Now, the number of boat arrivals is at its highest number in a decade since you were in government. Immigration Minister Chris Bowen today has blamed that on your party for voting against offshore processing. Well,
I think the minister needs to take responsibility for the failures of his own government. The Coalition has had a proven policy on this for over a decade. We've stood by that. They know clearly what our position is. We are not in coalition with this government. The Greens are in coalition with this government.
You wanted to process in Nauru. They want to process in Malaysia. What's the difference?
Well, the difference is human rights. The difference is human rights. The government wants to completely abolish all human rights protections in the Migration Act for offshore processing. The government refuses to restore measures that worked in favour of this excuse of a policy that they won't even have the courage to raise with their coalition partners, the Greens, to insist on its support. So the Malaysian people swap now just sits as an excuse to roll out every time a boat comes to try and lay the blame, sadly, on people who have had nothing to do with the government's policy failures. I mean, the government removed the measures that worked. They refused to restore them. And now they seek to run from accountability for that and not even pick up the phone to Christine Milne to ensure support of legislation they say is important. We think they should go in another path and they refuse to do that, but that's a matter for the government.
We'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much for coming in.
Thanks, Emma.